Economic issues led to the American Revolution.
These economic issues were brought up as a result of the Stamp Act, Sugar Act, Townshend Act, and Proclamation Line. I'm going to speak about the Stamp Act. So we have the whole idea that taxing angers people, and they act on those issues. They act on those feelings, and issues arise. The Stamp Act, I have a quote from the textbook. Purpose was to help finance the operations of the empire, including the cost of stationing British troops in North America without seeking revenue from colonial assemblies. It was the first tax to be put directly on the colonists by the British government, and colonists they thought this was unconstitutional, and they actually mobbed. And the issues of taxation by the British left the colonists with anger that they ended up leading to tension, which lasted for 10 years until the Revolutionary War. And then now I'm going to talk about the Sugar Act. The Sugar Act put tax on coffee, indigo, and certain types of wine. It affected a lot of the merchants, so a lot of society's economics were really messed up. People felt the act restricted justice, and then I have a quote, actually again, to the colonists, greater regulation of trade was not simply an economically restricting measure, but one which expanded the sphere of British involvement in the everyday activities of the colonists. Thank you. So it really made them feel restricted, and they felt like they were being controlled by the British, which is kind of what they moved away from England for.
So the Townshend Act was kind of a big part in kind of leading up to the Revolution. Royal troops appeared in Massachusetts in October 1768 to enforce a heavy tax burden, and then that led to tensions rising between the colonies and America, which led to the Boston Massacre, which was the killing of 5 colonists by British soldiers on March 5th, 1770. So that brought up a lot of problems and tension between the British and the American colonies. The Townshend Act was to force taxes on glass, lead, paper, paints, and tea imported into the colonies, and the Americans saw the act as an abuse of power over them by the British, and then the colonies were then led to limit the imports from Britain, so they didn't have to pay those taxes on those items. And that's when the law directed proceeds to the government and not to the colonies. They took the taxes and all the money that they got from the items that were taxed and gave it to the government of England and not to the colonies. And this angered the colonists a lot because they didn't get anything from bringing in their own products. And in 1770,
2 minutes left.
All the taxes were repealed except the tax on tea, which led to the Boston Tea Party. And the effects of the Townshend Act, there were quite a few. There were the colonial assemblies disappeared, John Hancock and the seizure of the Liberty at Boston, the British troops in Boston, the Virginia Resolves, the Virginia Association, which made an agreement that no one would use British goods that were taxed, the Tea Act, which led to the Boston Tea Party. So it's kind of, the Townshend Act is kind of a big thing that caused many problems that led up to the American Revolution. And then the Proclamation Line of 1763, the settlers wanted to move west to the Appalachian Mountains for more land because the east was getting overpopulated with all the people immigrating. But Britain did not let them move west because they wanted to keep the Indians there. They reserved the land for the Indians. So only the colonial governments could arrange purchase of the Indian land. So people in the colonies could not decide to just go and buy the land. And this quote is, the British aim was less to protect the Indians than to stabilize the situation on the colonial frontier and to avoid being dragged into an endless series of border conflicts. So the settlers and speculators, land speculators are people who buy land cheap and then sell it to get a profit. They were enraged and ignored the new policy. One of those people was George Washington, who ordered agents to secretly buy up the land of the Indians and get as much as possible. And the proclamation made relations between settlers and Indians worse, so there was more tension between those two as well. And Britain was restricting them from doing what they wanted to do. It wasn't kind of like their own land, their own home. And that led to the settlers being very angry with Britain, causing the American Revolution.
Yeah.
There we go.
Thank you.
Perfect.